Hey students, we are changing it up. As you can already see, we're sitting at the podcast table, going to be doing some more discussion type sermon thing for the summer. Pretty excited about it.
Yeah, this is like the new series for NextGen students. I'm super excited about it because it's kind of like a dream come true.
Yeah,
you know,
sitting
like
at a
I
table
feel
with
like
a microphone.
a secondary calling of mine would be to be a DJ, and then I think below that, the next one would be to be some sort of like host, TV or radio.
Yeah.
Actually, I have been on radio like this, and it was broadcast through the entire capital of Honduras.
Oh, wow. That took a turn. I did not know what you were about to say. Honduras. Could they understand you?
Translator.
Ah, that's pretty cool.
It was cool.
So I kind of became a youth pastor to talk in a mic. That's why when I get on a charter bus, I grab the microphone.
That's not the only reason, by the way.
No, just kidding. It's pretty high up there. But anyway, so we're starting a new series, and it's the summer. So
new series called Life Lessons.
Yeah, Life Lessons.
Life Lessons.
Hey, so pretty excited. So what we're going to do is we're just going to look at biblical characters and really just look at their life and
holistically.
Yeah, look at the whole thing. And kind of just see things that we can learn from it, and good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah,
all of it.
I think about like times that we have. I'll be preaching, and I'll be like, "Hey, we're gonna talk about Adam and Eve in the garden," and I'll be like, "How many of y'all know about them?" And like 20% raise their hand. So what we want to do is kind of like give some stories to some of those names that you hear, just for people to get a good knowledge of their life as a whole, and how God used their failures, mistakes, even some of their victories.
Yeah, I think the cool thing about a lot of these people is they had a lot of mistakes. And that sounds weird, but like how the Lord used it. So, but anyway, hey, so today we're just going to start out by looking at Joseph, and Joseph we're talking about is Old Testament Joseph, that sold into slavery and ultimately becomes if we laugh, can you cut that out?
No, we're just gonna keep going, guys. There you're watching this, we're funny guys, so we'll laugh. Talking about Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph sold into slavery and then ultimately kind of becomes number 2 in Egypt, which is a huge deal, by the way. So I think, but there's all these little things in his story. So ultimately what we're going to look at with Joseph, the big topic we want to hit is forgiveness. And we'll kind of hit that throughout. So anyway.
And Joseph, you probably know at least maybe that he was the story with the coat of many colors. Like that, I feel like is a story that you might have learned in preschool or something like that.
Yeah.
Which I bet, dude, that coat was awesome. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, many colors.
Like, he was looking fly.
Yeah, with that coat. Yeah. So we'll jump right in, which actually kind of brings us to the first thing. So when we'd love for you to have your Bibles out during this, be taking notes. We're going to kind of jump through a lot of sections. So you don't have to turn to all of them. We've kind of got a roadmap here of different points in his life. But so Genesis 37 is really where it kind of picks up with Joseph. And really the first thing you see about Joseph's life, Genesis 37 in verse 3, it just says that Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other children because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. And then it says Jacob made a special gift for Joseph, which is the coat, and gives it to him. So that right there kind of sets the stage. He's the favorite,
So you have a brother named Joseph.
Yes.
Is he the favorite?
No, I think I'm the favorite. Or Johnny.
Okay.
My other brother.
Wow.
I don't know.
You're throwing him under the bus.
Actually, my
already?
children and their children are the favorites now. None of us are the favorites.
Okay, yeah, the grandchildren.
Yeah,
down.
We're out of the picture now.
Yeah.
But yeah, so literally you set the stage for Joseph, and he is he's the favorite. So that already sets some tension. You're like, okay, he's the favorite. And then immediately in verse 4 of chapter 37 says Joseph. So verse 4 talks about he's the favorite. Then verse 4 says, but his brothers hated him because of this. And it says they couldn't say a kind word to him. So there was a lot of animosity.
That was exactly the word that came to my mind.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I just think...
Well, and to no fault of his own,
Yeah.
At least from what we know here, is that he's the favorite and his brothers hate him for it. It's
Yeah.
like it's not like he robbed them or something.
Yeah, I think the thing
It was like they just from the get go
sure.
had those
Yeah.
feelings.
And I never want to like take a passage and like stretch it to be something it's not.
Right.
But it doesn't really go into detail here. But if his brothers are aware he's the favorite, that means the father made it very apparent.
Yeah.
You know, which I assume just means obviously the coat had to be worth a lot of money. You know, it's very expensive. It was like one of a kind. Gave it just to him. So obviously this has been building up. It's not like it started with the coat. It probably been all of Joseph's life so far. And at this point, I think it says that he's 17. Does it say that? Yeah, he's 17. So pretty much for 17 years, they've just watched Joseph over and over be picked and be the favorite. And yeah, it's going to build up a lot of animosity. So his brothers hate him. So then you start there. It starts off, here's Joseph. He's Jacob's favorite. And his brothers literally despise him. They can't even say a kind word to him. That's pretty heavy. But immediately you keep reading Genesis in verse 5.
It gets much worse.
Yeah,
it makes the situation hotter.
It does. So
Turn the
literally
heat up.
turn it up. And it says that one night Joseph had a dream. It says so then he goes and tells his brothers about it. And then it says that they hated him more than ever. And if you kind of read what he says, you're like, wow, you just kind of walked in there and said this. And he's like, listen to the dream. And we're walking through Genesis 37 here. He says, we're out in the field. We're tying up bundles of grain. And suddenly my bundle stood up, and your bundles all gathered around mine, and they bowed low before it. And so they already hate him. And so they respond with, you think you'll be our king? You actually think you'll reign over us? And then it says again, they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about it to them. And I don't want to assume anything, but it kind of looks like, I wonder the way he even presented the dream to them. You know what I mean? I wonder if he was like humble about it, or if he was like, hey, listen, I'm already number one in the family. Had this dream that you're going to worship me. And says they hate him. And then it goes on in verse 9. He has another dream. It says, I have another dream. I'll tell you about it. Sun, moon, and 11 stars bowed low before me. And he told him about his dream. And then he actually tells his father, but his dad gets on to him. He's like, well, your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow before you. And then it says, now, so not only did they hate him, but then in verse 11, then it says that they're jealous of him. So now you've got hatred, and then you've got jealousy. And so now you just, mix these two together, and obviously you're getting a bad combo, which is what sets the stage.
Toxicity.
It is. It's very toxic. And so you get this really bad combo now of hatred and jealousy, and obviously it sets the stage for what's about to happen. And actually, in verse 11, it says, while his brothers were jealous of him, his dad's not. His dad was actually kind of, says he was wondering and pondering about the dreams, right? So he's not worried about it. He's like, I wonder. So I'm sure his brothers got even more angry with that. So then, so Jacob loves him more. The brothers hate him. He has these dreams. Now they hate him even more, and now they're jealous. So then they come up with this plan, and I think this again is in Genesis 37. We'll kind of hit it quickly, but what happens? They're like, hey, you know what? I think what Joseph shows up to
Verse
he goes,
18.
he goes to check on them. Verse 18. They saw him coming, and they recognized him, and then they made plans to kill him. So obviously, there's a lot going on in their hearts when they see him coming. They're like, hey, let's kill him.
Let's kill him.
Just,
yeah, and then in verse 19, they say, here comes the dreamer.
Yeah.
And then verse 20, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the cisterns.
Yeah.
And then we can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. And then we'll see what becomes of his dreams.
Yeah. So it shows you that I think you can read it so quick and be like, oh, they wanted to kill him. Or just think about that for just a moment. How angry and just how bitter.
Jealousy.
Yeah, and
builds
everything
up.
that's built in you. Your first thought when you see a guy, especially your brothers, let's kill him. Let's kill him, throw him in there, and then lie to our dad about it. And not think twice. Yeah. So it is heavy, which, take a side note, I think it just is a picture of what anger can do to any of us, what it can build, what it can fester into, anger, bitterness, jealousy,
right.
Not necessarily bring out that kind, but just, hate in our hearts. So
then
be careful about all those things.
His brother Reuben kind of takes this and he's like, hey, let's actually not kill him. Let's put him in that cistern.
And he'll just die of natural causes pretty much. He'll just starve to death. I guess,
But then it says Reuben was secretly planning to rescue Joseph and return him to his father.
Yeah. So then he arrives, right? So Joseph arrives, verse 23. Joseph arrives. They rip the robe off of him. They grab him and they throw him down. Yeah, they take it, throw it into the cistern. There's no water in it, so they throw him in it. And so they've thrown. So this is just where the story gets even crazier. It says they throw him in there, and then they sit down to eat. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So you just threw a guy ultimately to his death, and you know he's not dead. He's going to slowly die, and you're like, "Let's eat." You know, like it's so weird and scary, and I think that just shows like sinfulness when you appease it and just it makes you numb, and you just gotta be careful with all that. Anyway, so
they see a group of people with camels coming to them, and they're like, "Hey,
Ishmaelite traders.
What do we gain by killing them? Let's actually sell them into slavery and make some money." Right?
Yeah, which again shows, hey, how about let's make some money? Greed. I'm just so much sin just festering here, and so let's not kill him. Let's make money, and then here's kind of an interesting point. It says sometime later, like Reuben actually comes to get him, and then he's not even there anymore. So Reuben's not even there for that part apparently.
Yeah.
But anyway, so what happens? They try to cover it up. They want to make sure, they want to pretend he's dead. So it says that in verse 31, they kill a young goat. They dip Joseph's robe in the blood.
Right.
Then they send it to their dad, and then they lie to their father. And so there's no honor there. And here's what's crazy to me is not only do they lie, now that they got to carry that lie. You know what I mean? You got to think about that for the rest of your life. Like, if anything comes up about Joseph, and there's a lot of us, so we've all got to agree together. Just think about their carrying.
They had to plan it out, and then their father suffers through that loss and mourns for his son. But all the meanwhile, Joseph was sold into slavery and then taken to Egypt, the land of Egypt, which was just far from there.
Yeah. Which, side note, just by the way, I've always heard this about a lie. When you tell a lie, you have to remember it. If you tell the truth, you can forget it because it's truth, right? So if it comes back up, you're like, oh, yeah. But if you tell a lie, you actually have to really remember the lie you told. Anyway, it's just a thing I've heard in life. I think that's a great...
I know that gets you because your memory is horrible.
I have a pretty bad memory. I tell my wife that all the time. I'm like, I have a really bad memory, which is very accurate. I have such a bad memory. So then they take him to Egypt. So I know we've kind of talked about the brothers, and so now we're really going to look at what happens with Joseph. So all these bad things happen, but immediately, so you actually skip over chapter 38 because it kind of takes a side, and then you kind of jump into chapter 39, and immediately it says he's taken to Egypt. He's purchased by Potiphar, who is an Egyptian officer who's high up, captain of the guard for Pharaoh. So he's high up in the rankings.
Big dog.
Yeah, he's important. But then immediately, verse 2, the Lord's with Joseph, and then he succeeded in everything he did. So he was the favorite at home with Jacob. The brothers betray him, go to kill him, sell him into slavery. Then he goes to Egypt. Now he's a slave, and then he just starts succeeding. Why? Because the Lord's with him. Yeah. So he's given higher ranking, and then he gets pulled in. And
verse 5, he's put in charge of the master's household and property, and began to bless the household for Joseph's sake.
That's right.
Yeah.
Which, side note, I think the fact that it just talks about the Lord being with him, I think it just shows that in all of this, Joseph's heart never turned from the Lord. He was still I'm sure he questioned. I'm sure he was like, what is happening? Why did I have those dreams? What?
Right.
I don't want to add something that's not here, but I mean, common sense as us as people, I think there's what is going on? Yeah. And it just says the Lord's with him, which would just simply imply that his heart was still, you're still the God of my father, and following him. So it says puts him in charge of everything. And so Potiphar gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. So not only is he succeeding, but then Potiphar completely trusts him. So then comes a great moment you see in Genesis 39 where sin kind of comes in and really the enemy comes in and tries to mess it all up. So it's where you get the moment with Potiphar's wife, which we use this all the time when we're talking to students about sexual immorality and things like that, because Joseph does a great thing here. In Genesis 39, it says that Joseph's very handsome, he's well built, and Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully, and she goes and she says, come and sleep with me. So she goes and tries to seduce him, and what does it say? He refuses. Look, he says, my master, trust me, your husband trusts me with everything. No one has more authority than I do. And he's like, why would I do such a wicked thing to him? It would be a great, and then he even goes on to say, this would be a sin against the Lord. Like, not only is this wrong for my master, this is just a sin with God. Like, which just shows Joseph's heart. Like he obeys his higher ups, but he also loves the Lord.
Yeah.
And then verse 10, she keeps putting pressure on him day after day. So this isn't like a one-time thing, right? This is a day after day after day occurrence. And then it says, verse 11, no one else was looking. He goes in to do his work. She came, grabbed him by his cloak, and she's like, no. Then she keeps trying to persuade him, and then he tore himself away from her, says he left his cloak. So I guess kind of like a jacket kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then what does she do? She's mad now, and so she turns.
She's mad, and he runs away. He ran from the house.
Yeah.
And I guess, either out of anger or out of the fear of, like, people finding out what she was actually doing, she, turns it on him.
Yeah. And she turns it on him, and he's innocent, right? We know that, but she turns it on him. And so then she goes and tells everybody that the slave that you brought into our house, he tried to come in and fool around with me. I screamed, he ran outside, and he left his cloak. And immediately what happens in verse 19 of chapter 39? Potiphar's furious. He hears about this story, which is a lie, but he hears about it, and he says he takes Joseph and he throws him into prison where the king's prisoners were held, and there he remains. So now...
So he's been... Yeah. His brothers want to kill him, but then instead they throw him in a cistern, put him in slavery. Then this happens, and all of this just keeps mounting up.
It's a snowball.
Snowball.
It seems to be good, and it's horrible.
He's in prison.
But then, real quick tag in 21 says, but the Lord was with Joseph in prison, and he showed him his faithful love more, which means that Joseph's heart never... There's so much to learn from Joseph in this. It's just the simple fact that in it goes from really good to really bad. And look at the lie that was told about him. Yeah. Obviously, he's still faithful to the Lord. So I think there's just a lot to learn from that in general, that, something like you're completely innocent, and you're now in the lowest of lows. You're completely innocent. You've been framed. Yeah. Now you're in prison. And obviously, you're going to go there to die. That's how that worked, But he's still faithful to the Lord. And so then it goes on to say Joseph becomes a favorite with the prison warden.
Right. And he puts him in charge of all of the other prisoners and everything that happened in the prison.
Yeah.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
And it says the warden had no worries because Joseph took care of everything. And then it says that again, the Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Yeah. So then you have even more dreams that happen
and so
while he's in prison.
Yeah, so I don't think we want to hit on these long because we could talk about these for a long time. But there's two people, meets Joseph, and they have two different dreams. He interprets them. One of the dreams turns out to be great. One of them ultimately ends in the guy being killed. But he interprets the dreams. Yeah. And
for the Pharaoh.
Yeah.
Because the Pharaoh's people, they couldn't interpret it.
Yeah. Yeah, big deal. And so they can't interpret it. Joseph can, obviously, because of the Lord. And Joseph tells him, he's like, Pharaoh's going to lift you up. And he says this to the cupbearer, right? He has the good dream, and Joseph's like, Pharaoh's going to bring you out of this, restore you. Yeah. And he's like, just remember me. Well, what happens? He gets forgotten. Still in prison. Goes on to say the Lord's still with him. Just says at the very end of chapter 40, verse 23, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer, however, forgot all about Joseph, never given him another thought. So, Joseph's thinking, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to be forgiven and go back to kind of a normal life. And then, nope, still in prison.
Yeah.
Which is just so, Joseph's just, he goes through it. So he interprets the dreams. And then what happens, verse 41, Pharaoh has some pretty intense dreams. Yeah. And no one can interpret them. And then he's like, can anyone interpret this? And then the cupbearer remembers, in verse 9 of 41, he says, today I've been reminded of my failure. Some time ago you were angry. I had this dream. There's a guy in prison.
He says there's a young Hebrew man with us in prison who was a slave of the captain of the guard. We told him our dreams, and he told us what each of our dreams meant. So the cupbearer is reminded of Joseph and refers him.
Yeah, so finally remembers and doesn't tell you how long this is, does it? I mean, I don't remember. Obviously, it's a long time. Yeah. And so Joseph's in prison, and well, then what happens? Pharaoh sends for Joseph. He comes in, and Joseph, again, honors the Lord. Verse 16, it's beyond my power to interpret this. He said, but God can tell you what it means and set you at ease, which there's Joseph, again, just pointing to the Lord. And
so he predicts some prosperity, but then also famine in the land.
Yeah.
And so the Pharaoh is able to save up the grain and the goods and stuff.
Yeah. So literally now
The whole country is riding
huge
on
famine.
Joseph.
Huge famine's
Yeah.
coming, and Joseph's like, before the famine hits, you're going to have good years. And so during those years, you need to stock up, be prepared.
Yeah.
And then what does Pharaoh do? Instead of just being like, cool, thanks, he's like, all right, you're that guy.
Yeah.
He's like, you're the guy who's going to be over all of that. And so you see that in Genesis 41, in 37 and all that, he gets this huge, like, so my Bible says Pharaoh promotes Joseph to power, literally. So
Yeah.
they're well received. Pharaoh says, can anyone find is there anyone else like him? No, there's not. And then he's like, and then he literally goes from a prisoner in one day, from a prisoner to number 2 in Egypt.
Yeah.
Okay.
He says, only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt.
Yeah.
So that's a big deal. I mean, Egypt was a powerhouse.
Yeah, it was the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the place in the world. So, which again, you can read these things, but this is real.
I love this part, though. Side note, in verse 42, it then says that Pharaoh removed his signet ring from his hand and placed it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in fine linen clothing and hung a gold chain around his neck.
Yeah.
He was like, that's
knew you
what's
were
up.
lying.
I'm going to give you my ring.
Yeah.
And here is my bling,
Honestly,
my chain.
Honestly, what just happened is he went from completely impoverished to super wealthy, just
Yep.
like that. Because you know those things are probably pure gold and all that stuff. So
Yep.
he goes from impoverished to
And then gives him a
super wealthy.
chariot.
yeah.
I mean,
it's a big day for him. It's a
Yeah.
pretty,
prisoner to baller.
literally, yeah.
Like
in one day, it's like
But out.
okay, and obviously it's because he's honoring the Lord throughout all this. And the Lord's with him, and so at this time it says he's 30 when he starts serving with Pharaoh. That's what it says in verse 46. So he has this huge promotion. Okay, so we kind of jump through real quickly. It just says that God provides for Joseph all through this. It just shows us that Joseph is faithful to the Lord in all of this, even becoming number 2. He's still faithful to the Lord. So much to learn from that. And then, what happens in Genesis 41? The famine starts. And
Everything that Joseph predicted happens. The
Everything.
7 years of prosperity and then the 7 years of famine. And that leads us to 42 because Joseph's brothers that were far away had to come to Egypt to get
food.
some crops, get some food
Yeah.
because of the great famine.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gets us to our final part of the story.
Yeah. So we encourage you to read all of 42. There's a lot, but
Yeah. Definitely a lot there.
there's a lot. I mean, obviously, imagine the emotion when Joseph realizes these are my brothers in front of me. There's obviously Joseph has seen he knows the bigger picture. The dreams I had were real. Look at where I'm at now. Like I've God put me here to take care of people. My family's here. Like everything they intended to hurt me has turned into be good. So there's tons of little things in 42 where they show up and Joseph kind of tricks is not the right word.
Well,
but
they show up and they do not recognize him,
yeah.
but Joseph recognized them because up until then, I mean, he was in slavery. He was dead to them.
Yeah, they thought he was dead.
And so I'm sure he looked
it never crossed their
different,
mind. It's
everything.
At least 12 years later. Like it's at least 12 years later. So
yeah, and so basically captures them. They get put in jail. So I'm sure they're already kind of fearful. Of that.
And then they start questioning. This is all happening because of what we did to Joseph years ago, right?
They
Like,
remember. They're
they
like,
start-
man, our sins are catching up to us.
That's right. And there's a whole bunch of little things to that story, and go and get Benjamin and bring him back. And then what happens? You see in chapter 45, you see this huge moment, which is kind of the big thing we want to hit with Joseph for this kind of topic, is where he reveals himself to them.
Yeah.
And so
Because they didn't know he was there.
yeah, and so not that he's toying with them, but I think he's
trying to see their heart
Yeah.
in the matter. If they had gotten to a point where they had repented of their sins, right?
Yeah, and quick little Jesus kind of tag in chapter 44, where it talks about Judah intercedes for Benjamin, which Jesus comes from the line of Judah, which is just point of it says where Judah intercedes and it's like, hey, don't take Benjamin, take me, which is just a quick little picture of Christ. Just I love that. There's pictures of that all throughout Scripture, especially in the Old Testament, just foreshadowings of Christ, especially with it being Judah. But anyway, chapter 45 says, verse 1, Joseph can stand it no longer. And there's many people in the room. He tells them all to leave. It's just him and his brothers. And then he just immediately says he broke down and wept. And then the tag, he wept so loudly the Egyptians could hear him, and it reached Pharaoh's palace. So there, obviously, I think the word is just Joseph's really upset, right? And then he just, verse 3, I am Joseph. And then his first question is my dad still alive? And it says his brothers were speechless. They were stunned. Yeah, they couldn't believe it. He's like, come closer. I would just put myself in their shoes real quick. They're probably, what? And then it's probably immediate, like, oh my goodness, and then, oh my goodness. Like
then Joseph says, don't be upset, and don't be angry with yourselves for selling me to this place. It was God who sent me here ahead of you to preserve your lives. This famine that has ravaged the land for 2 years will last 5 more years, and there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God has sent me ahead of you to keep you and your families alive and to preserve many survivors.
Yeah. And I love verse 8. God sent me here. It wasn't you.
Yeah.
Like, you had a plan to kill me, and I just think it just shows how the Lord's good. Like, he takes things that are meant for evil, and he turns it for his glory and his good, and I just love all that stuff. And then he's like, go get my dad, bring him here. And again, in verse 14, he says, weeping with joy, he embraces all of them, Benjamin, and he says he kissed all of his brothers, he weeps over them. And there's just this cool moment, and basically what we're just seeing is Joseph forgave his brothers.
Yeah, complete forgiveness, because in 15 it says that Joseph kissed each of his brothers and wept over them. And then, I love this, and after that they began talking freely with him. So there was no more of the wall that was between them previously.
So what a huge moment that you can glaze over quickly, or you can, what we want to do is stop and park there and just think, I mean, I'm just imagining if somebody tries to kill me, and then they're like, you know what, let's just sell him to slavery and get rid of him and pretend and lie to our dad. Like, I'm gonna the same thing that happened to his brothers would have happened to me. Like, but he doesn't. He does the complete opposite, and which is just cool. You know, which is what Christ calls us to. You know, when the world says do this, Christ says turn the other cheek. You know, so Joseph does the complete opposite of what his brothers do. Instead of building up hate, anger, bitterness, jealousy, he just he would have had to have let that go a long time ago.
Yeah,
it's not like in that moment he was like, I'm gonna forgive him. He had to let that go. Obviously, for the Lord to have blessed him and to be with him, he had to let that go.
He forgave them a long time ago.
Which, man.
And then let the Lord in his timing bring him back.
And here, and to Joseph's credit, Joseph forgave them because he was walking with the Lord. You know what I mean? That's all a product of, it's not just something in him that was just naturally like, I forgive them. It was just a product of, he kept his heart faithful to the Lord, and the Lord Spirit birthed that in him. So just something for us to see. So if we could highlight that thought to you guys, it's just the importance of forgiveness. And we see what anger and bitterness does and what it can turn into, and then you see the opposite. And now it's, you know, and so what we want to do quickly is we want to look at Christ, what he said about forgiveness. So really quick, when we read Matthew 6:14-15, Jesus says this: if you forgive those who sin against you, your heavenly Father will forgive you. He says, but if you refuse to forgive others, your Father will not forgive your sins, which is a pretty heavy statement to say, but Jesus didn't mess around about the forgiveness thing. Like, he's not kind of like, it's a thing you need to do. No, Jesus is like, you know, you need to forgive. Like, and then
he's like, how many times? Well, Matthew 18:21 is there's that big parable about people forgiving their debts and stuff, and that's when he says you need to forgive them 70 times 7.
Yeah, so Jesus like forgive 70
times
so 7.
He's not saying, hey, you need to keep a tally of these number of times. So what he's saying is that always forgive.
Yeah, I mean, that's a parable where the guy has the big debt, and then he's forgiven, and then he goes to a dude with a smaller debt and doesn't forgive him. And Jesus is like, come on, man. Like, it's a great parable. But Ephesians 4:32.
We forget. You know, the point in that is that we forgive others because Christ did it
which is
to us.
Yeah, and Ephesians 4:32 I think says it so good. Instead, be kind to each other, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, just as God through Christ has forgiven you. Which it's a foreshadowed in how Joseph forgives his brothers. Christ has forgiven us in our worst sinfulness, and so I think it's great to be reminded, like, how can we not forgive others when Christ forgave us in our absolute worst? You know, which is great. And so the life of Joseph, it's great. There's tons of moments that foreshadow Christ and that are just encouraging. But overall, we just wanted to hit the idea of forgiveness. And so as your pastors, we just encourage you. I think it's always healthy to stop and ask the Lord if there's any of that, what happened to Joseph's brothers in your soul. Is there anger towards someone, bitterness, jealousy? You need to let it go. You need to give it, easier said than done. By the Spirit in you, give it to the Lord, forgive, and then you need to forget. That's how, like just like Jesus says, I have forgiven your sins east from the west, right? That's what the Bible says. So we need to forgive and then throw it out, which in our sinfulness, we're good at forgiving, but kind of hanging on to it, which is still birthing sin in there. So anyway, forgiveness, huge
Well,
thing
this
to
has
look
been
at.
good. I'm excited about jumping into looking at more characters and looking at their lives. So
It's been fun.
Yeah, it's been fun. Good life lesson. Looking at forgiveness. We'll holler at you next week.
See ya.